Welcome back to Unleashed with Marc Morano on TNT. All right, joining us now is Peter Schweizer, author of the New York Times #1 bestseller book, Blood Money, Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. And Schweizer is also president of the Government Accountability Institute and co-host of the Drilldown podcast. Welcome. And you can, by the way, you can find his information at peterschweizer.com. Welcome to Unleashed on TNT, Peter.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mark. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, let's talk about your book, Blood Money, Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. First of all, what's wrong with China involvement in America? Apple uses them to make the iPhones. America's dependent upon them for our solar panels and our windmills and the components, the rare earth mining for electric vehicles. You have the Chinese partnerships with everyone from Disney to the NBA. China's buying up American farmland. We seem to have a partnership with China. We opened up trade. We gutted our industrial base. China's making most of our products that used to be made in America. Shouldn't we be all a big, happy friendship? What's the problem with China?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, that was the premise behind so much of our policy over the last 30 years, right, Mark? I mean, we were supposed to open up, engage with them, and they were going to become more like us, more free, less hostile to the Western world. The reality is that didn't happen. And in fact, they've embraced what they call disintegration warfare, which is a strategy that they adopted in 2012 that basically calls for having a war with the United States while not appearing to have a war. In other words, they don't want to have a kinetic shooting war, but they want to engage in a series of activities that are designed to undermine and disintegrate the United States. And that's really the focus of the book.
Wow. So let's go. Let's just get a little history here. Going back, I guess it goes back to the 90s in particular, I guess with trade and other economic reforms. How did China end up being sort of the world's #1 global producer, I guess it's #1 global economy, correct, as well? How did this happen? What forces did the U.S. cede? Was it essentially inevitable? Was the U.S. just in a sort of industrial decay that this was going to happen anyway? Or was it pushed along by certain legislation and erroneous things? Give us a timeline. Give us any legislation. How did China get so powerful vis-a-vis the United States, at least economically to start with?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was inevitable in the sense that just because you're a large populous country doesn't mean you're going to have the massive economic growth. It happened because the United States made a bargain in the 1990s that large corporations, financial firms would get access to the Chinese market. It gave them huge profit margins, great expansion of production of goods, investment within the Chinese economy, created lots of capital growth. The problem is that it was predicated on China evolving and changing, becoming less hostile to the rest of the world. They don't necessarily become a Jeffersonian democracy, but they become something that represents other, major communities in the nation. They become, like Japan or like the UK in terms of their approach to governance. That didn't happen. The problem is what happened is what they call elite capture. That is that you had Silicon Valley and Wall Street and these big firms that started making so much money in China became addicted to that money for their profit margins. So they became some of the biggest advocates for China. So when Donald Trump as president imposed tariffs on China, whether one agrees with that policy or not, doesn't matter. What matters is, what did China do? They didn't go and lobby against it. They went to Silicon Valley and Wall Street and said, you guys are going to go lobby against this because if you don't, we're going to cut off your access to our market. So that's where we're in the situation we are today, where very few of these large, powerful institutions are actually standing up for the national interest of the United States. They're more looking at their bottom line, and they're giving China a pass on some very abusive behavior, not just with COVID, but with fentanyl and a series of other things they're doing that are severely damaging to the United States.
Okay, well, I don't want to spend too much time on Chinese history, but why didn't China, when they became wealthier, evolve into like even Vietnam or South Korea or Japan, why did they keep totalitarianism? Why did they keep the that model where the country never became free? Why didn't it open up? What was the reason for that? Was it because of Wall Street and corporate America propping up the Chinese leadership, or was it just something internal with China? They had a control on the power that no amount of prosperity or opening up of China was going to topple the government.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. A lot of people thought was going to happen to them what happened to the Soviet Union, that, that system didn't work and they're going to evolve. They didn't, because what the Chinese realized is they were not going to embrace a Marxist-Leninist economy. They were creating a market Leninist economy. In other words, they gave some of the attributes of free market capitalism, but they maintained the Leninist political control. I think they were able to do that in part because of the growth that came as a result of the Western investments. But also, I think part of it is part of Chinese culture and tradition. The respect for authority that is so central to Confucianism probably helped. Plus the repressive nature of the government. Let's remember in 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. You also had Tiananmen Square in China, where an estimated 10,000 students were killed by PLA soldiers. So this is a very repressive government that was more repressive, actually, than the Soviet Union was. I think that was a part of the component as well.
Wow. And so that you mentioned these corporations. Now you have the Apple CEO in just like 2017 saying that Apple and China's values align. You have Justin Trudeau, the Western leader in Canada, said he admires China's basic dictatorship because they can get things done. You have Tom Friedman on the pages of the New York Times praising China's one-party rule as, quote, enlightened leaders can just get the things done when it comes to green energy or climate policy. You have Biden administration officials praising China. You have the UN climate chief, you have UN secretary generals, you have the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. The whole world just seems to be, there's a whole world of these, I hate to call them elites, but you know who I mean, all have praised China, whether it's corporate CEOs, academia, administration, the heads of these why do they like China so much? Or is it because they want to be in good favor with them? What is the deal? Are they ideologically simpatico with what China's doing? Why has it had such an enamoration of the Western leaders that they like China?
No, it's a great question, Mark. I think it's a combination of the both. I don't think that there are guys in Silicon Valley that are CCP sympathetic in terms of everything the party stands for. But the thing we have to remember with a lot of these elites, and they are elites, for them, it's all about the mission and the goal. And look around the planet. You cannot find a more elite-driven system than the Chinese CCP. For all of their talk about the workers and about the masses, this is a top-down governance system. And you hear this all the time in Silicon Valley. Even Elon Musk has said he admires the efficiency of the Chinese system. Well, if you don't have property rights, you don't have an independent judiciary, you don't have voting, you don't have checks and balances in government, it can be very easy to be efficient. They built him a massive Tesla factory in 9 months, where the same thing in the United States takes a couple of years. So that's part of the appeal. And I think it should be a cautionary note for us, because these elites seem to be so enamored with their ideas, with their mission, that they oftentimes don't step back and look at the implications it has for the type of government that we're going to have. I do think the other component of it, though, is the profit and is the money. If you say nice things about China, you are absolutely given unique access in that country. Some of the hedge funds that got first entry into China were led by people who were some of the most praiseworthy of how great and illustrative the Chinese leaders are. So it's a combination of sort of this twisted idealism, I would say, but also this hardened self-interest of they'll give me access to the market if I say nice things.
Wow. Well, can you give some insight of what happened in 2020? Why did the World Health Organization send a delegation to China? And they literally, and I have the newspaper, the media clips, all the reports, they literally told the world, if you want to stop a virus, meaning COVID-19, coronavirus, copy what China's doing. And China was doing the most tyrannical response, literally locking people in their homes. They had videos of people allegedly dropping dead in the street, which is kind of odd for a respiratory virus. But the whole Western world, like lemmings, fell in line. How did that happen? How did the World Health Organization get so infected that they say we had to copy China? And it seemed like most Western leaders accepted China's claims of success of stopping a virus by using these draconian lockdowns. Can you shed any insight into what happened there and how the World Health Organization was corrupted by China?
Yeah, great question, Mark. I actually have an entire section in BloodMoney on COVID. And what becomes clear is that this was a massive Chinese attempt. Once they knew that the virus existed, this was a massive attempt to manipulate the West into adopting their methodologies. So here's what we know. We know in November of 2019, the Chinese knew that they had a virus and that it was a virus that was transmissible from person to person. They did not acknowledge or share that with the Western world until the end of January, which basically gave them a 3-month head start. What did they do? They cornered the market on PPE supplies. They imported massive amounts. They prevented exports. So when they finally alerted us to the fact that this can go from person to person, there was a global shortage of PPE supplies. This is by design. It gave them leverage over the Western world. Then they essentially jigged the system by encouraging this notion that the only solution is lockdowns. Up until this point, the Centers for Disease Control and NIH had said the way you deal with a pandemic is the sick people stay home, everybody else goes to work because the normalcy is important to prevent there from being panic and anxiety. Well, there was a report that came out in March of 2020 from Imperial College in London that said if the US did not imitate Chinese lockdowns, there would be 2 million Americans dead by the end of the year. It stunned everybody. In memoirs, it's recounted that President Trump heard this report and he was shocked and he was stunned. Here's the problem. That Imperial College report was based on Chinese data. It included Chinese scientists, and Imperial College is the premier research partner for the Chinese government in the entire Western world. So this was a setup that was designed to manipulate us, and it worked because based on that report, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, and others instituted Chinese lockdowns. The Chinese even donated drones to California, New York, and New Jersey, and you had local officials in those states flying drones with loudspeakers imposing lockdowns on people. It was something out of the third world. So this was absolutely designed to be a political mechanism by which we would adopt some of the techniques, the severe techniques they were using.
Well, yeah, I just showed earlier in this program clips from John Stossel, April 2020, showing the exact drones you referenced, telling people, get off the beach. They had helicopters, they had drones flying around. They arrested a surfer out in the water. It was, it was amazing because I just mentioned all the world leaders praising China's one-party rule, but it was almost like the once free West. Every governor, mayor would declare a virus emergency, right? Overnight, they became dictators, and it was a one-party rule situation. You didn't have town councils, supervisors, parliaments. You didn't have Congress, anyone voting. It was all decided through unelected bureaucrats, health officials, and executive orders. They were able to shut down schools, churches, stay-at-home orders, cancel weddings, funerals, medical procedures. That truly was the Western world copying Chinese model of efficiency. So my question is, how did the Trump administration not know this about Neil Ferguson and that report about China? It wasn't any advisors to Trump. Should Trump have known better than allowing him, as we now know, Deborah Birx admits she duped Donald Trump, her and Anthony Fauci. You can see the press conference where they have big smiles on their face while Trump announces 10 days to slow the spread, the national lockdown. And of course, he does the COVID emergency declaration. We're still living under the 9/11 emergency declaration, which again, emergency declarations are kind of like the Western world emulating China, where you can just sort of bypass democracy. But should the Trump administration have known better in March of 2020 when that Imperial College report came out that it was Chinese propaganda?
I think they certainly should have. I mean, look, any president's going to look to, especially in a health emergency, talk to the health professionals. But the problem is the health professionals were treating their Chinese colleagues as they would a colleague that was Dutch. And the problem is, as I talk in the book, these Chinese experts are CCP party members. Some of them are lead the CCP party cells within these research laboratories. So they're functioning as political operatives. And one official said that COVID was a form of unrestricted warfare on the West. And what they mean by that is a form of warfare to which they can gain an advantage, not just in terms of people dying, because there were things they did that actually maximized our body count, but also in terms of imposing their political will on us. Our leaders need to have more confidence in ourselves, in our system of governments, and in our knowledge. Again, up until this point, the conventional procedure for CDC was everybody else leads the normal lives and the sick stay home. To abandon that base of knowledge and immediately rush into the Chinese model shows a severe lack of confidence that our leaders should not have.
All right, we're talking with Peter Schweizer, author of the New York Times bestseller book, Blood Money, Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. We'll get a little bit more into the fentanyl and all the other ways they're killing Americans. This is Unleashed with Marc Morano on TNT. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Unleashed with Marc Morano on TNT. We're continuing our discussion with Peter Schweizer, author of the New York Times bestseller, Blood Money, Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. All right, well, let's go right into that. What is China's role in the fentanyl crisis in America? Is this one of the ways they're killing Americans?
Yes, absolutely. I think the biggest misnomer about the fentanyl crisis is people think this is basically the Mexican drug cartels doing what they always do. And in reality, the drug cartels are the junior partner. This is a Chinese operation. People know that the precursor chemicals come from China, but that's only the beginning. Those precursor chemicals come into Mexico. They arrive at a port, the port of Manzanillo, which is run by a Chinese company close to the Chinese state. Those precursors are then sent to a town in northern Mexico where 2,000 Chinese nationals help the drug cartels turn this into fentanyl. They then get pill presses that are sold by China at costs, are sent to the drug cartels to put them into pill form, which is how most people end up getting poisoned by this stuff. Most people don't know they're taking fentanyl when they die. These pill presses, again, come from China. The drug cartels use Chinese apps and communication technologies to communicate securely because they know China won't share those communications with U.S. law enforcement. And the money laundering of these operations is now done through Chinese state-owned banks, oftentimes with Chinese students in the U.S. on education visas. So this is a Chinese-run operation with the drug cartels, the junior partner. It is their replay, their revenge for the Opium Wars. And they are quite proud of the fact that they're doing it. There was a senior Chinese official, Mr. Wan, who was sanctioned by our Treasury Department for being involved in the fentanyl trade. 3 months after he was sanctioned publicly, the Chinese government gave him an award, and he gave a rousing speech on how he was involved in these activities because it was helping China in their war against the United States. So we need to recognize that this is China poisoning Americans, and our leaders need to confront them. Unfortunately, they won't, because in many cases they're compromised.
Well, you made a reference to the Opium Wars. Can you explain the historical context to that for our viewers?
Yeah, I mean, there was a big opium trade primarily in the 19th century, and the Chinese emperor tried to shut off that trade. It was very lucrative to the British. The British basically used military force to say, no, you're going to continue allowed opium to be sold in China. And it reached a point where an estimated 25% of the Chinese population was taking opium, and it really decimated and undermined the country and led to what they call the century of humiliation, where China became this broken power. They view this as an opportunity to return that, in other words, by doing the same thing to us, by poisoning people. Fentanyl is now the leading cause of death for people under the age of 45 in the United States. It's wreaking social havoc. And they view it as something that is both profitable but also diminishing American power.
So, I never quite, when I first heard about fentanyl, it just never made sense, because one of the things as a drug dealer, whoever the drug, you don't want to kill all your clients, but why, just a little bit more, why would they put something so potent? I mean, you're saying it's partial revenge, it's partial just to create chaos, I guess, in America, but why would they? Why would a young person takes it without realizing it? Who would take it wanting to take it? In other words, are there fentanyl addicts? Is there a specific class of fentanyl addiction that's separate from other drugs? Or why is this such a prevalent drug? Why is it in such a high dose, I guess, practically speaking?
Yeah, no, great question, Mark. Here's the key thing to understand. Chinese organized crime networks, with the support of the CCP, joined ranks with the Mexican drug cartels 2011 and 2012. And here's basically how it works. The Mexican drug cartels, do they really want to kill their customers? No, they don't. But here's the thing. The fentanyl profit margin is 20 times what the profit margin is on selling cocaine and heroin. Think about it. With cocaine and heroin, you got to grow all these plants. You got to transport all this freaking stuff. You got to refine it. With fentanyl, you just need a little bit of it. You put it in a pill, in a fake pill. People that think they're taking an Adderall or a Vicodin, you put a little bit of fentanyl in there. It gives it a little bit of a spike because it's so potent. It gives that illusion of actually doing what you think it's doing. The problem, it's not. It's a fake pill, and it's got fentanyl in it. And the kid who is taking an Adderall because he's got a college final he's studying for has no idea that he's not taking an Adderall. He's taking a fake pill with fentanyl in it. He dies of an overdose. The drug cartels looking at 20% profit margin. Look, we can lose some of our customers. Who cares? This is far more profitable for us. China gets what it wants, which is this revenge for the Opium Wars. And so are there fentanyl addicts? There are some. You'll see pictures of them in, San Francisco or Chicago. That is the small portion. The vast majority of people that are dying of fentanyl overdoses or fentanyl poisoning don't even know it's fentanyl they're taking. They think they are taking some pill, a Vicodin, a painkiller or something, when in fact they're not. They're taking a pill, a fake pill that's been laced with fentanyl.
All right, I don't mean to be dense on this, but what would you tell parents and kids, college age, high school age? So the whole problem isn't that they're taking what they think is, some kind of prescription drug. It's they're getting it off the black market, and there's no way to verify it. So you're basically, the message the kids should be: do not take anything anyone gives you. Do not take anything bought off the street. It's not what it appears to be. Is that the key message that we want to send to kids for practical purposes to avoid this?
You nailed it. That's exactly right. Do not, even if your buddy, I mean, look, I don't advocate anybody taking an Adderall if you haven't got a prescription, but if your buddy, your best friend comes and says, I've got an Adderall, take this Adderall, don't trust it. Don't trust it, because the odds are overwhelmingly they bought it from somebody, and that person bought it from somebody, and it was made on a pill press in Mexico or somewhere in the United States, and it is laced with fentanyl because fentanyl is so cheap in comparison, and just a little bit of it gives the illusion of what you think the drug is going to do. So yes, do not take any of these pills unless you have a prescription for it. Otherwise, you are gambling with your life by doing so.
Wow. Okay, so what's the solution to this? You mentioned the Chinese involvement, drug cartels, the Chinese pill presses flooding in. How do we practically make a dent and start reversing this fentanyl invasion in the United States? What's the reform measures we need to do?
Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to actually confront China about this. And there's a variety of reasons why I think our leaders don't want to. But, Trump raised it in 2018 very publicly, and President Xi told him, okay, we're going to take steps and fix this problem. Well, guess what? President Xi lied. They did not take care of it. They did not fix any of it. Now you have the Biden administration that says, we have raised the issue of fentanyl with China, but there will be no finger pointing. There needs to be finger pointing. And I think we need to adopt a position with China that we can't really have a normal relationship with you as long as you are engaging in this kind of behavior. I'm not talking about a war, but what I'm saying is we can't talk about, re-upping trade agreements. We can't talk about cultural exchanges. We can't talk about ordinary cooperative things until you stop doing this. Something really interesting happened, Mark, during COVID. Remember when the supply chains shut down from China and all those ships were hanging off in the Pacific Ocean? Guess what? Fentanyl deaths in the United States dropped dramatically.
Wow.
because the chemicals were not coming from China. So the point is they can deal with this if we put the political pressure on them, but they're not going to do it as long as they're getting away with it and nobody's confronting them about it.
Wow, that's just phenomenal. Joe Biden has called Xi Jinping his friend. What is the Biden administration's policies been to China? Anything? I mean, is there any sign of hope that the Biden administration has a clue when it comes to dealing with China?
No, they've been terrible on it. And I think you can look at it at a couple levels. First, on fentanyl, Joe Biden has said there'll be no finger pointing. His Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, told CBS News last year that he thought maybe some of these precursor chemicals going from China to Mexico to make fentanyl were being shipped by accident. I mean, come on, that's absurd. So they are incredibly naive on this. And I think part of the problem is Joe Biden's financial entanglements through his son Hunter and brother James. I mean, the Biden family has received a lot of money from China for no real discernible business purpose. There's no service that the family provided legitimately for this. And the problem is, this is really 1 degree separated from the fentanyl trade. I'm not suggesting the Bidens are involved in the trade or anything like that. But in 2017, they received a $5 million forgivable interest-free loan from a Chinese businessman. Everybody acknowledges this. They never repaid the loan. That businessman was business partners with a Chinese gangster named White Wolf, who runs a criminal gang called UBG. That's the gang that set up the Sinaloa cartel in the fentanyl trade. So you literally have 1 degree of separation. So does Joe Biden really want to have a conversation about China involvement in the fentanyl trade? He does not, and that's the reason.
All right, now you have China. Politico had an article a few years ago. There's worry about a Chinese agricultural land monopoly. They were buying up land. They're one of, I think, the top 3 or 4 single largest. But Bill Gates, oddly enough, passed China as the #1 farmland owner. China owns a pork processing plant. They bought land near U.S. military bases. Is that a coincidence? And the other thing is TikTok. What are your views on TikTok? People like Senator Rand Paul say TikTok is not the best thing in the world, but it's actually, we don't want to become more like China by banning it and giving the Biden administration the power to determine what Americans can see and not. That's usually the purview of, Soviet Russia or China, where you ban citizens. Are you in favor of the TikTok ban? And is there danger with this TikTok ban in terms of the precedent it would set?
No, great question. I'm a big fan and respect greatly Senator Rand Paul, but he's dead wrong on this issue. Okay. The law is very, very specific and says that media companies, including app companies that are owned by people or companies that are in adversarial nations like China, cannot own these companies, these media companies, and they are forced to sell them. What people have to understand about ByteDance is this is not just a Chinese company. This is a Chinese company wedded to the Chinese state. The algorithm that is so essential to TikTok and its success is not just a company secret. In 2019, the Chinese government designated it a state secret. That's how much value the Chinese government places on this. ByteDance, which is the parent company of TikTok, does joint research with the Chinese Ministry of State Security, which is their spy apparatus, on specifically how to manipulate people online. And there is all kinds of other information and evidence out there on the same thing. So I think the bill is a good idea. It's an absolute necessity. I quote extensively in Blood Money from Chinese officials describing how they are using TikTok to manipulate people in the West already.
All right, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Peter Schweizer. We could go on all day. It's Unleashed with Marc Morano. Thanks for watching. Appreciate your time, Peter. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll see you next time.